In 2007, one company made half of every mobile phone on planet Earth. Half. Every other manufacturer on the planet was fighting over the scraps. Their headquarters in Espoo, Finland employed over 60,000 people. Their brand was worth $35 billion. They were untouchable. Then a man in a black turtleneck walked onto a stage in San Francisco. And within 5 years, Nokia was dead. Here's something almost nobody knows. Nokia did not start as a tech company. Not even close. It started in 1865. In a sawmill, on the banks of the Nokianvirta River in southern Finland. Fredrik Idestam was grinding wood pulp for paper. That's it, paper and wood. Then came rubber boots. Then cables. Then televisions. Nokia spent over a century being everything except what it became famous for. By the 1980s, Nokia was a conglomerate making toilet paper, rubber tires, and consumer electronics all at once. CEO Kari Kairamo bet the entire company on telecommunications. It was a wild, desperate gamble that should have failed. It didn't. The 1990s belonged to Nokia. Full stop. They launched the Nokia 1011 in 1992. The world's first mass-produced GSM phone. Then came the 2110, the 6110, and in 1998, the Nokia 3210 changed everything. No external antenna, interchangeable covers, a phone that teenagers actually wanted to be seen holding. It sold 160 million units. One phone, 160 million. Nokia's market share rocketed to 27% by 1998 and kept climbing. By 2000, revenues hit $30 billion. By 2003, they controlled 38% of the global handset market. By 2007, that number was 50.9%. Jorma Ollila, the CEO who engineered this run, was called a national hero in Finland. Nokia was Finland. Nokia was paying 4% of the entire country's national tax revenue by 2000. Let that sink in. One company, 4% of a nation's taxes. Watch what happens to the mobile market from 1998 to 2012. Nokia builds an empire, then Apple and Samsung don't just challenge it, they erase it. This is what a collapse looks like in real time. But there was something rotten inside the machine. And it had been there for years. Nokia's internal culture had calcified into pure bureaucratic terror. Senior engineers and middle managers were so afraid of delivering bad news up the chain that they simply stopped doing it. A 2015 study by professors from INSEAD and Aalto University interviewed 76 Nokia insiders. What they found was damning. Executives who expressed concern about touchscreen development or software gaps were sidelined or pushed out. One internal estimate from 2004 showed Nokia engineers had already built a working touchscreen prototype. They called it the tablet. It had an app store concept. It had gesture controls. Leadership killed it. Why? Because it cannibalized their existing hardware margins. The very innovation that could have saved them was buried in a filing cabinet in Espoo while Jorma Ollila celebrated another record quarter. We had all the components to build the iPhone years before Apple. The problem was never technology. The problem was management. January 9, 2007. Steve Jobs walks on stage and announces the iPhone. Nokia's official response was almost incomprehensible in its arrogance. Their chief strategist publicly dismissed it as a niche product for a niche audience. Their CEO Olli-Pekka Kallasvuo said, without blinking, that Nokia had no particular reason to be worried. Inside the company, engineers who flagged the touchscreen threat were told the hardware margins didn't support it. That Nokia's physical keyboards were a competitive advantage. That consumers would never trust a phone without tactile buttons. They were wrong on every single count. In 2007, Apple sold 1.4 million iPhones in the first year. Not impressive by Nokia standards. But by 2008 that was 11.6 million. By 2009, 20.7 million. By 2010, 47.5 million. The numbers weren't just growing, they were compounding, and Nokia was standing in the middle of the tracks, arguing about whether the train was real. Nokia's phones ran on Symbian. For basic phones in 2005, Symbian was fine. For smartphones in 2009, Symbian was a disaster. It couldn't render the mobile web properly. App development was a nightmare compared to iOS. Developers hated it. Third-party app numbers told the brutal story. By 2010, Apple's App Store had 300,000 apps. Nokia's Ovi Store had fewer than 30,000. A 10-to-1 ratio. Nokia knew Symbian was dying. Internal memos from 2008 acknowledge it. But rather than scrap it and rebuild, which would cost time and money, they kept patching it. Kept pumping money into a rotting foundation. They invested $5 billion in Symbian development between 2007 and 2011. $5 billion on software that developers refused to use and consumers despised. That's not a mistake. That's institutional denial on a billion-dollar scale. In September 2010, Nokia made one final desperate move. They hired Stephen Elop, a Canadian, a Microsoft executive, the first non-Finnish CEO in Nokia's 145-year history. Wall Street cheered. Finland held its breath. In February 2011, Elop sent an internal memo that leaked immediately. It became one of the most famous corporate documents in tech history. He compared Nokia to a man standing on a burning oil platform in the North Sea. Jump into the freezing water and maybe survive. Stay and definitely die. The memo was honest, brutal, and completely accurate. Then he made the announcement that sealed Nokia's fate. He dumped Symbian, but instead of building their own new OS or adopting Android, which Samsung was already riding to glory, Elop announced a partnership with Microsoft. Nokia phones would run Windows Phone. That decision destroyed Nokia's last remaining advantage, hardware volume. Android was free. Windows Phone cost Nokia a licensing fee. And nobody wanted Windows Phone. We didn't do anything wrong, but somehow, we lost. Nokia's stock peaked at $65 in 2000. By September 2012 it had fallen to $1.63. A 97.5% collapse. In September 2013, Microsoft announced it was acquiring Nokia's Devices and Services division for $7.2 billion. $7.2 billion for a company that had been worth $250 billion at its peak. A 97% discount. Elop walked away with a $25 million severance package and went back to Microsoft, prompting serious questions in Finland about whether he had been a Trojan horse all along. Those questions were never definitively answered, but the optics were catastrophic. Meanwhile, 25,000 Nokia employees lost their jobs in the transition. Finland's GDP actually contracted partly due to Nokia's collapse. The city of Salo, where Nokia had a major manufacturing campus, became a ghost town of empty factories. One company's fall had broken an entire municipal economy. By 2015, Microsoft had written down $7.6 billion on the Nokia acquisition. More than they paid for it. They killed the Nokia brand name entirely. It was over. The Nokia name didn't completely disappear. In 2016, HMD Global, a Finnish company, licensed the Nokia brand and started making Android phones. There's a kind of tragic poetry in that. The company that refused to embrace Android now sells Android phones under Nokia's name. HMD Global is essentially a ghost wearing Nokia's face. The phones are fine, forgettable, they hold around 1% global market share in 2024. For a brand that once owned 51%, that's not a comeback. That's a gravestone with a pulse. The original Nokia Networks division, the infrastructure side, was never sold to Microsoft. It merged with French-American company Alcatel-Lucent in 2016 to form Nokia Corporation as it exists today, focused on 5G network equipment and telecommunications infrastructure. A 159-year-old company that started making paper now makes 5G antennas. Something survived, but the Nokia that mattered, the one that made phones everyone on Earth carried in their pocket, that Nokia is gone. So what do you actually learn from watching a 50% market share turn to dust in 5 years? 4 things. And they are not gentle. Number 1. Dominance is not a moat. Nokia owned half the planet's phone market. That didn't protect them. If anything, it made them slower. The bigger the market share, the more you have to lose, and the less incentive you feel to disrupt yourself. The companies that should fear disruption the most are always the ones who feel it the least. Number 2. Culture kills companies, not competition. Nokia's engineers had touchscreen technology in 2004. The iPhone launched in 2007. The technology wasn't the problem. The culture of fear around delivering bad news, documented by academic research, prevented innovation from reaching the top. If your organization punishes honesty, you are building a machine that lies to itself until it dies. Number 3. Platform bets are existential. Choosing Windows Phone over Android wasn't just a bad product decision. It was a platform suicide. When you tie yourself to a dying ecosystem, you die with it. Samsung picked Android. Nokia picked Microsoft. The market rendered its verdict in about 18 months. Number 4. Speed of acknowledgement matters more than speed of action. Nokia's leadership acknowledged the iPhone threat in private by late 2007. They didn't act decisively until 2010. That 3-year gap is where Nokia died. Not in the factories. Not in the boardrooms. In the silence between knowing the truth and refusing to say it out loud. Nokia made paper in 1865. They made rubber boots. They made cables. They made the phone that half the world carried in their pocket. And then they made the single most expensive strategic mistake in the history of consumer electronics. Not because they were stupid. Not because they didn't see it coming. But because seeing it and doing something about it are two entirely different things, and Nokia never bridged that gap. The next time someone tells you their company is too dominant to fail, think about a Finnish factory on the banks of the Nokian River. Think about 50.9%. Think about what it costs to be right about everything except what matters most.